evening, visitors. Welcome to the Australian War Memorial's Last Post ceremony. My name is David Sutton, and joining us today from the Royal Australian Navy is Captain Lisa Batchelor. We warmly welcome Mr. Ian Lindgren, Vice President of the Australian Peacekeeper and Peacemakers Veterans Association. We welcome the veterans who have served, those that are still serving, and the families that love and support them. We acknowledge the members of RSL and Services Clubs Association, RSL Victoria and RSL Queensland, who are watching the broadcast of this ceremony across Australia. During tonight's ceremony, wreaths will be laid at the base of the Pool of Reflection by visitors to the memorial. If you are able, please stand and join in singing the national anthem. The Australian War Memorial was the vision of Charles Bean, Australia's First World War official historian. Bean landed with the Australian troops on Gallipoli and stayed with them at the front through to the end of the war. The idea of this national memorial and museum came to him at Pozières, France, in the depth of the bloody fighting of 1916. Bean's idea was that this would be a place where families and friends could mourn loved ones buried in faraway places. It would also be a place that could help all Australians understand what these men and women had endured and what they had done for us. Bean's vision, to which we remain true, is best expressed as inscribed in the entrance of the memorial's galleries. Here is their spirit, in the heart of the land they loved, and here we guard the record which they themselves made. Tonight, we will read the story behind just one of those on the Roll of Honour, which lists the names of more than 102,000 men and women who have given their lives for us in war and on operations for more than a century. But first, we present a lament, Flowers of the Forest. Wreaths or floral tributes will now be laid at the base of the Pool of Reflection.
Today we remember and pay tribute to Lance Corporal Sidney John Treweek. Sidney Treweek was born in Gundagai in 1892, the eldest son of Sidney and Sarah Treweek. The family lived in nearby Grahamstown, and Jack, as he was known, went to school at Shepherdstown and Adelong. After leaving school, he worked as an engine fitter in the district. In 1915, Treweek enlisted in the Australian Imperial Force. He travelled to Liverpool Camp outside Sydney and trained there for a number of weeks. In August, he set sail on the transport ship Runic, bound for Egypt. He continued his training at the army camps there before arriving on the Gallipoli Peninsula in mid-October and joining his unit, the 18th Australian Infantry Battalion. By this stage of the campaign, the battalion was acting in a defensive role near Courtney's Post. Treweek wrote a letter to his parents describing his experiences on Gallipoli. Of the snow falling in November, he wrote, "It was a very pretty sight, but that never made up for the cold." He described the successful withdrawal of British forces from the peninsula in late December, noting that he had been suffering from mild jaundice. Once on the island of Mudros, he was ordered to hospital to recover. After the difficult conditions in Gallipoli, he was grateful to spend Christmas and New Year's in the care of the medical staff. The 18th Battalion received reinforcements in Egypt, and the men trained there for the winter months. In March, they sailed for Marseille and from there travelled to the north of France to join the fighting on the Western Front. At this time, the region near the Belgian border was known as the Nursery Sector, a comparatively quiet area where soldiers would become accustomed to the rigours of trench warfare. In June 1916, the 18th Battalion was stationed at the front line near Bourgogne, south of the French city of Armentières. One night, a company of men from the unit charged across no man's land and raided the German trenches, capturing 4 prisoners. During the fighting and subsequent German artillery barrage, Treweek was wounded in his hip and leg by shell fragments. Treweek was evacuated to hospital in northern England, where he recuperated for 3 months. He then travelled south to the army camps on Salisbury Plain, where he continued his training into the summer of 1917. He rejoined his battalion in France in August 1917. In late 1917, the British commanders began planning a large-scale attack on German forces in Flanders, around the Belgian town of Ypres. The 18th Battalion took part in 2 of the battles aimed at capturing the high ground behind the village of Passchendaele. The first was the Battle of Menin Road in September, and the second was the Battle of Polkappel in October. As a result of the heavy losses that the unit suffered in these actions, Treweek was appointed to the rank of Lance Corporal. Late in December, as the battalion remained in the region of the Franco-Belgian border, Treweek suffered a minor facial wound from a bomb, but he was back at duty within 2 days. Treweek took a fortnight's leave to England in March 1918, but returned to duty when the Germans began what was to be their final major offensive of the war. The 18th Battalion and most of the Australian units in the north were rushed to the Somme sector to defend the major rail hub city of Amiens. In April, the unit was rested in billets behind the front line when a German artillery barrage began falling. Treweek was in a house that was struck by a shell, and he was badly wounded in his right leg. He was evacuated to a casualty clearing station, but died of his wounds 2 days later, on the 11th of April, 1918. He was 25 years old. Jack Treweek was buried at Nompervale British Cemetery. alongside more than 400 French and Commonwealth soldiers of the First World War. 2 other Treweek men served in the AIF. Jack's younger brother, Private William Treweek, served in the Light Horse and transferred to the artillery. He was badly wounded at the beginning of 1917 and returned to Australia in early 1918. Jack's uncle, Private Jim Treweek, also served in the artillery and returned to Australia in October 1919. Lance Corporal Sidney John Treweek is listed on the Roll of Honour on my right, among almost 62,000 Australians who died while serving in the First World War. A photograph of his headstone is displayed today beside the pool of reflection. This is but one of the many stories of service and sacrifice told here at the Australian War Memorial. We now remember Lance Corporal Sidney John Treweek, who gave his life for us, for our freedoms, and in the hope of a better world.
Please stand for the reading of the Ode and sounding of the last post.
They shall grow not old, as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun and in the morning, we will remember them. Lest we forget.
We leave you this evening with the words of the memorial's founder, Charles Bean. Many a man lying out there at Pozieres or in the low scrub at Gallipoli, with his poor, tired senses barely working through the fever of his brain, has thought in his last moments, well, it's over. But in Australia, they will be proud of this. Ladies and gentlemen, girls and boys, that concludes the last post ceremony. We thank you for visiting the Australian War Memorial and wish you all a very good evening.